Hi, everyone, and welcome back to That UFO podcast. My name is Andy, and on the show today, I am joined by, my guest has today served as president of the Gorbachev Foundation for the USA from 92 to 95, president of the State of the World Forum 95 to 2004, with Mikhail Gorbachev serving as convening chairman. He is a published author of several books, has a PhD, and is currently director of the New Paradigm Institute's Washington office, among many other academic achievements and accolades. I couldn't fit them all in, but I'd like to welcome James Garrison. Jim, welcome to the podcast.
Pleasure to be here.
Did I do that justice? Was that okay in terms of an introduction?
That was way too much.
There was a few more things that could have been in there, but I'll let you maybe talk about those as and when are appropriate.
Short version intros are always better.
Absolutely. And listen, for you, that is short. Let's be fair. But Jim, I'd love to know, first off, a little bit more about you and your background, specifically what's kind of brought you to the UFO conversation.
Well, I think the main reason why I'm here as director of the Washington office of the New Paradigm Institute is due to the fact that I've known Danny Sheehan, who will be well known to your audience, for 50 years, over 50 years. We met back in the mid-1970s at Harvard, where we were both students, and we became fast friends. We've been friends ever since. We've had epic adventures along the way as he's done various things on his side, and I've done them on my side. And in 1976, we both served various positions at the Jesuit Office of Social Ministries in Washington, D.C., which was part of the Jesuit Conference. He was the general counsel. I was the director of nuclear policy. It was during that time that Project Blue Book released declassified microfilm to the National Archives. And so as soon as we found out, we scurried over to the National Archives, and I can still remember bending over, looking at these little microphones and the light to make sure we could see it. And it was a great adventure. There was great excitement. We formed up the Washington Interreligious Staff Council, and we proposed that UFOs be one of the priority areas. And they said, we'll do nuclear weapons, we'll do world hunger, we'll do human rights, but we will not do UFOs. I had my own UFO sighting experience in 1992 while I was in the Republic of Georgia, actually down there by the Black Sea, Caspian Sea. And then Danny was working on the UFO issue, as your listeners will know. And then I essentially never lost my interest. I always assumed it. It seemed to me that it took greater faith to believe that we're alone in the cosmos than to believe the obvious, that if we're here, there's got to be gazillions of other life forms scattered through this vast cosmos of ours. So I was just transitioning from executive leadership at a university that a number of us founded about 20 years ago. And Danny called me up last August and he said, "Hey, Jim, we're opening up the New Paradigm Institute office in Washington, D.C., because we want to start working more globally and systematically on the UFO, now called UAP, issue, and the Senate was going to be passing legislation and the Congress and so forth." So here I am. That's the short story of how I ended up here in Washington, really working very closely with Danny and the whole team. And I can go into some detail as to what projects we're doing and the Global Disclosure Day and so forth, but I'll leave that to your leading.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm going to lead you back then to 1992 first, and it would be remiss of me to not ask about your UFO sighting. Can you talk us through, was that lights in the sky, something a little bit more exotic? What happened there?
Well, it was interesting. as you mentioned in the introduction, I knew Mikhail Gorbachev very well. I was actually the last foreigner received in his Kremlin office in December of 1991 before he resigned on December 24th of that year. I was very good friends with the foreign minister, Edward Shevardnadze, and others in the Politburo. After the dissolution of the Soviet Union at the end of December 1991, Shevardnadze went to Georgia, where he became president. And he invited me to take a trip there, which I did. And then we decided that I would come back with a delegation of American CEOs, which I did. We met him and met various business executives there in the newly formed Republic of Georgia. And then one afternoon, we were walking along a hillside, and I noticed in the sky, clear blue sky, there were 3 dots and a triangle, 3 dots. And I just paused because that was rather unusual. Then the dots started to move, and then one of them went up, and they were doing kind of strange configurations. And I stopped the group and said, "Do you see that?" And they all turned around and said, "Yeah, yeah." And I said, "What do you think it is?" No one knew. I said, "I think it's a UFO." And everybody said, "Whoa, it's a UFO." And so it was there for maybe 30 seconds, maybe a minute, and then poof, disappeared. But it was that classic orbs in the sky doing maneuvers that is not possible under modern aviation physics. And a whole group of us saw it all at the same time and concluded that we were having a UFO experience. So and then I kind of filed it away, because back in those days, in the 90s, you didn't talk about it because everybody thought you'd be crazy.
Yeah.
And now everybody talks about it as a badge of honor that they had the opportunity. But I've never encountered an extraterrestrial being, up close and personal, which I would love to do. But that still remains an experience that I seek but have not had.
Well, I'm going to come back to that. Another question I've got following up from that, but I'm going to leave it till a little bit later. So I'll come back to that one, okay? But thank you for sharing the sighting, because not everyone is always comfortable doing that, and people appreciate hearing them. So bringing you back then to where we are now, like you mentioned, Danny Sheehan, very well known across the UFO community. I've hosted Danny on 3, maybe 4 occasions now, and hopefully to have him back on after the hearings in the next couple of weeks. But from your view, talk about the New Paradigm Institute for anyone maybe unfamiliar, and what is your view on the work of the New Paradigm Institute?
Yeah, very good question. The New Paradigm Institute has its origins with the research that John Mack, Dr. John Mack, head of psychiatry at Harvard University, did back in the early 1990s. He was a psychiatrist. He was contacted by the Pentagon. They had a number of people who had reported UFOs that were in the military and also some civilian personnel. And they had determined that these people were crazy, and they wanted Harvard Medical School to do interviews with them to confirm that these people were in fact either psychologically unstable in some way or delusional. So John Mack got interested in that, and instead of assigning it to one of his staff, he decided to do the interviews himself. And he concluded that these people were of perfectly sound mind and that what they were reporting was actually scientifically of real interest. So he began to talk with them more deeply. He began to expand his research. He wrote a paper on the abduction experience, because a number of them reported that they were taken up into the spacecraft and they had various experiences and were brought down, but they couldn't remember very well. And so he used holotropic breath work, which was a certain kind of breathing technique to help them animate their memory, et cetera, et cetera. And he wrote it up as a paper, sent it off to the New England Journal of Medicine, and they returned it to him saying, this is not publishable. So he decided to publish it as a book, which became a New York Times bestseller called Abduction. And when the book came out, Harvard University essentially started an inquisition. And they had him up before an academic council. And that was when he contacted Danny Sheehan to be his general counsel. And so Danny came in, and I raise this is because the conclusion that John Mack reached after all his research on the extraterrestrial experience and the abduction experience and talking to all kinds of experiencers, he says, the only way to understand this is with a new paradigm. You have to expand your consciousness to get this, because these beings are coming from outside our little box of time, space, and causality. And the trauma that most of the people who were taken up as in abduction experiences or experiences in some way, the trauma was not what they experienced. The trauma was the expansion of their psyches so that they could absorb the experience. So Danny and John Mack, who I had the privilege of knowing as well through other contacts, basically incubated the idea, but nothing was done. And then after 2017, when Lou Elizondo, the head of the Aerospace Anomaly Threat Identification Program, ATIP, doing the research on UFOs, couldn't get clearance for what he wanted to do, resigned, took the information to the New York Times in December of 2017. That was really a watershed. And Danny again served as the general counsel to Lou Elizondo during that time. And then the Schumer Amendment last year with the National Defense Authorization Act, where for the first time in history, the US government says that non-human technologies, non-human intelligences, technologies of unknown origin exist. And all the information gathered by the contracting corporations and the agencies of the US government, all that has to be turned over to the National Archives by October 20th, in 2 days' time. So that's when Danny, knowing that that was going to happen, that's when he said, it's time to start the New Paradigm Institute. That's when he called me. And that's when I came back to Washington, and at the end of September of 2023. The agreement that we had was that what we were going to try to do through the New Paradigm Institute was to catalyze a global movement and a global coalition around disclosure. And that was going to take the form of a number of very important endeavors. Number one, we needed to develop training programs in the history, law, politics, and technology of UAP, training programs in extraterrestrial awareness and communication. Who are these beings? How do we develop a capacity to actually communicate with them? We have been providing courses in the history, law, politics for the last year, since the beginning of 2024. And beginning in 2025, we're going to be starting courses in remote viewing, mental telepathy, because that's the way people can communicate intelligibly with UAP. If you're interested in learning more about it, you can go to newparadigminstitute.org, or you can go to ubiquityuniversity.org, because we have an academic program whereby people can take these 2 certificates, one in the history, law, and politics, and one in ET, awareness and communication. You take those certificates, and then you can enroll in Ubiquity University for a master's and PhD degree in extraterrestrial studies. It's the first program, academic program, in extraterrestrial studies in history. It's very exciting. Then we decided also to start another project called the Citizens for Disclosure. How do we create grassroots citizen activist groups around the United States and around the world? And they just burst out. We now have Citizen for Disclosure groups in virtually all 50 states in the United States. We have CFD groups in Europe, in Ireland, in England, in Sweden, in Portugal, and various other European countries, in Latin America, in Middle East, in Asia, Hong Kong. And that's why we're going to be doing the Global Disclosure Day on Sunday, October 20th. It's really in the spirit of Earth Day. Started in 1970 by just a group of individuals, Dennis Hayes and a number of people. That's now become a global day of celebration of the Earth. So day after tomorrow, New Paradigm Institute and dozens of partners from around the world are convening Global Disclosure Day. On that day, when the National Archives should be receiving all the information that the government and contracting corporations have gathered since 1945 on UFOs, on UAP. Now, obviously, they're not going to be doing that because the bill was stripped of its executive force, but a lot has come in. And the National Archives says they're going to extend till September 30th of next year, the time that these organizations and corporations have to turn it over. So there's a momentum. There's a governmental momentum for disclosure. So it's going to be between 1 and 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, between 7 and 9 Central European Time. So you can get all the information on the New Paradigm Institute .org website. You go right at the top of the homepage and you'll see a place where you can, and we have, Andy, over 2,300 watch parties that have already been convened. People are tuning in from all over the world. It's an extraordinary thing, a celebration of humanity's cosmic moment. So anyway, that's the Global Disclosure Day. And then we have experiencer circles. A lot of people have had very deep experiences with the extraterrestrials one way or another, been hiding in the closet. It's almost like, being gay 10 or 15 years ago, and all of a sudden they're coming out of the closet. Well, people are coming out of the ET closet right now. So we have experiencer circles. We also have disclosure diplomacy network of organizations all over the world that are working on pressing their governments, working with the governments in one way or another to begin disclosure. Every country in the world has had experiences of the ETs. That's a known fact. So every government has some kind of information. So it doesn't matter whether you're in Belgium or Italy or Brazil or United States, Canada, wherever you are, Asia, China, Russia, India. Everybody's had ET experiences, and the governments know. So we take the position that there is now zero doubt. It's not a matter if UFOs or UAP exist, they exist, period. And now the people of the world know as a fact what the governments of the world have been trying to cover up as a fiction for 80 years. And that's what Global Disclosure Day is about. And we're heading it up. The first speaker is going to be Carl Nell. Colonel Carl Nell, who's been involved in this domain for a very long time as a senior military official, as a consultant to aerospace corporations, consultant to various organizations working on disclosure at the moment, involved in congressional legislation. He has recently said there is zero doubt that this exists. That's what Lou Elizondo's been saying. That's what David Grush has been saying. That's what Ross Coulthard has been saying. So virtually everyone is now saying they're here. Get over it. We need now to figure out how we're going to work on that. And that leads to another major project that we have. And that is our legal project that Danny heads up, protecting whistleblowers that are willing, ready, and able to come out and testify, but they're afraid. And we also have a project with the major world religions, because the religions have all had some kind of ET contact in their primordial past. So it's not the case that we're discovering ETs for the first time in our generation. That's true. But what we're going to then realize is that these folks have been here for a seriously long time, thousands of years. And we humans may, in the end, discover that we're hybrids.
A lot to unpack there, Jim. A lot. And I'm going to pull you back to a frustration first, okay? Now, you mentioned quite rightly that date was going to be October 20th, which is Global Disclosure Day. But that was going to be the date for the National Archives, to get this information in, here, get all the UFO stuff. It was pushed back, like you say, to September 30th. A big frustration with the UFO topic in general, and this goes back as far as people have been involved in ufology, involved in research, telling their stories, sharing experiences, is that the gatekeepers, the secret keepers, those in charge, the shadowy cabal, whatever you want to call them, they're always going to have something to keep this in the shadows, to keep it secret. And is this not just another example of, it looks like we're getting progress, and the can gets kicked down the line a little bit further. So it's almost that ever-ending carrot on a stick. And people who listen to this podcast and are big fans of the UFO topic, that can talk about it in a pretty serious and grounded fashion, joke about it, but get frustrated with this whole thing of it's always coming soon. So for many, this looks like another one of those, we were close, you'll get it next year. And then what's to say next year we get to September 29th and we find out it's going to be November 2026 and it gets kicked. So is that a frustration you share? And what do you see being done, not just from the New Paradigm Institute, but from wider afield, to stop those blockades always being put up?
Well, I share your pain, as they say. And I'm as frustrated as anyone, since I live and work in Washington, D.C., right? The National Archives is 200 meters from my office. So I walk by every single day as I'm going from my flat to my office. However, I frame my frustration in a larger context of an awareness of how much progress we've made. If you think about what's happened literally since Lou Elizondo and the New York Times article in 2017, we have accomplished more in the last 5 years than the previous 75. High-level officials are now coming out. David Grush last July of 2023, sworn testimony. Retrieved craft exist. Alien biologics exist. The government has them. The government's been covering it up. The government's been engaging in illegal activity, including murder. He said this in open congressional testimony. We've got, Carl Nell, as I said, saying there's zero doubt. Lou Elizondo's book, Imminent, is now a #1 bestseller on the New York Times. And he says, zero doubt. They're here. So as Michio Kaku, the physicist, the famous physicist at Columbia University, said in an interview with Ross Coulthard a few months ago, he says, we're in a major sea change. He said, a few years ago, the onus was on the movement, the UAP disclosure movement, to prove that UAP exist. Now it's the other way around. The onus is on the government to prove that they don't exist. And if you think about how many podcasts, 5 years ago, was your podcast happening 5 years ago?
No, 4.5 it started.
4.5, yeah. But that was post 2017.
Absolutely, yeah.
Now you can't even keep up with all the podcasts and the interviews and the tweets and the leaks and just last week there was a guy again on Russ Coulthard, the Australian journalist, with this immaculate constellation leak. Whistleblower had come to him saying, yes, not only they're lying to the public, but they have a project called Immaculate Constellation where they're actively engaging in reverse engineering. And that is a matter of knowledge in the Pentagon. So while they're specifically lying to cover up what they're really doing. And so that information just keeps coming out and coming out and coming out. So I think myself, we're in a, when they say that sometimes you see an accident in slow motion, we're seeing disclosure in a slow motion that is gradually accelerating momentum. And there's going to be 2 hearings. Back in December of last year, after the NDAA was passed, all of us said, well, we have to wait till 2025 because next year is an election year. The Congress isn't going anything. January of 2024, Tim Burchett, congressman from Tennessee, and Luna, Mace, Moskowitz, others, they formed the UAP caucus in the House of Representatives. Senator Schumer, Senator Round said that they're going to resubmit the bill, the Amendment 2.0, and go at it again. That didn't come through, but the UAP caucus has been active. There's going to be 2 hearings in the couple of weeks after the election, one by Senator Gillibrand in the Senate, looking at the Arrow offer, the all domain anomalous resource office in the Congress, with the new leader, Sean Kirkpatrick, who was the old leader who denied that UAP exists, was really kind of resigned in humiliation and ridicule. That had never been done before. So I'm frustrated on the one hand, but because I'm in the center of the storm, as I think as much as anybody, I see all that's happening around the world, and it's disclosure in increasing momentum all over.
I don't think I would have had this extended conversation with you a couple of hours ago, but I met my friend and UFO historian Graham Rendell today. Some folks will know Graham from his books that he writes, especially on the history of the subject. I've said I don't think, in my opinion, there's anyone better discussing Foo Fighter sightings and saucer sightings from the 40s and 50s, so people can go and check those out. But we had a really interesting back and forward chat, and I'm probably uncomfortably on the fence with the UFO situation as it is, because I like to think I can see the bird's eye view and I can see that progress you talk about, that if you step back and look at a timeline of just 3, 4 or 5 years, so much has happened that it would take you days and weeks to discuss the timeline thoroughly. Whereas it seemed maybe through the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, there were one or two small things
Yeah,
or
yeah, yeah.
major things, depending, but nothing like we've had in recent times. However, I can also see the other side of it where people involved in researching this topic for decades sometimes look or get in touch with me and others and say, I've seen similar to this before. We've been here before. And you're quite right. You rhyme off those names, Jim. You rhyme off Grush, Nell, Elizondo, Mellon.
Yeah.
And politically and from a social media point of view, we never had social media. Even as it exists now, we never had it. And that's had an impact. I just wonder, have you seen the film The Truman Show with Jim Carrey?
No.
No, right. So some folks will be familiar, but The Truman Show, and I'm going to spoil a movie that's almost 30 years old, but his whole life has been filmed inside a massive studio that's been built to look like he's in the real world and he doesn't know. And very famously, at the end of The Truman Show, he has a fear instilled in him of crossing the ocean. So he never tries to leave where he lives because he doesn't know it's actually, in fact, the world's largest TV studio. Jim Carrey steps on this boat, and the people in charge can control the weather. They cause a massive storm. They essentially try to kill him to stop him getting to the end. He weathers the storm. You could think of that as the UFO political progress we're going through. And he reaches the end, and the boat pierces a kind of cardboard wall that's meant to be just like the blue sky. And then he steps through the door, and the movie ends because that's him out into the real world. And I feel, as much as we've got progress, is there not possibilities? And I wonder, do organizations like the New Paradigm Institute plan for this sort of scenario where we think we've got the progress we're looking for, we open that door and step out into what we hope is the new paradigm, but those gatekeepers and secret keepers who have had 80 plus years of experience of
I hear
keeping
you.
this secret have another control method or
Yeah.
an attempt to control that narrative,
Yeah.
whatever that narrative is. And
Yeah.
this is probably me looking at it, Jim, in a slightly more negative point of view,
Yeah.
but I'm trying to look at both sides of the conversation at how can that progress still be stymied? Is that fair?
No, I mean, are you kidding? I think it's very fair. I think that the powers that be that have been manipulating this and keeping it secret for so long are not done. And even though light is beginning to shine through the darkness, we're only at the beginning of disclosure. I think Michio Kaku is correct that the onus is on them now, that the cat is basically out of the bag. The earth is round, it's not flat, as it were. But they are in active engagement with the disclosure movement. Like, for example, I have very good information. The CIA is beginning to infiltrate experiencer groups, right? It's the case that they want to control the narrative. So even if you look at some of the people who are saying there's zero doubt, they're framing the reality within a national security framework. And basically the message is be afraid. So I think you're absolutely right. The control mechanisms are not going away. They're not just saying, oh, okay, we tried it 80 years, let's give up. They're still actively engaged at levels of nefariousness that would be shocking if we actually knew the truth of what's actually going on. And I think that's one of the reasons why they're holding the lid as tightly as they are, because they've engaged in levels of criminality that would shock the ordinary mind in keeping this secret.
So on
Absolutely.
that, before I bring it back to the guest speakers and what this could achieve, that's an interesting conversation I've had a few times on here with various folks, that the criminality and illegalities, which are people like yourself and Danny's expertise, not like a layman like myself, will, in a post-disclosure world, we get that confirmation, we get that official capital D disclosure. We are not alone. the US and other governments or factions within those governments have actively been involved in covering up an ET presence, a non-human intelligence, whatever you want to call it, for decades. And here's the truth. We've got the tech, we've got the bodies, we know we're not alone. From there, you mentioned the ordinary mind, people be shocked at the criminality, illegalities that have gone on. Do you think a general public, the 99% that don't follow the topic closely, will care enough to look at the criminality, the illegalities, the goings on when they've got this new reality that we have an alien existence, we're not alone? Will that not all be overlooked, do you think, for the sake of moving forward? Because I feel sometimes elements of the UFO community, whatever that may be, can get really caught up in, when this all comes out, we're going to put people in jail, there's going to be hearings about the folks who have covered this up. Personally, I can't see that, because I think the story is too big that small aspect of it will just be forgotten in the melee of alien life, alien technology, and a new place in the universe.
Well, I think that's a very valid point. I think that the issue is certainly the public, but I think the more immediate political issue blocking disclosure are the people inside the legacy group that have engaged in criminality, that if the truth comes out, they would be prosecuted. And so I think part of what needs to happen is what happened in South Africa. There needs to be a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. There needs to be an understanding that, okay, whatever was done during the Cold War and whatever was done for whatever reasons legitimate to you and you're following orders, et cetera, et cetera. If you simply disclose, there won't be any retribution. And I think that's part and parcel with the whistleblower legislation. There needs to be protection for people who speak, and there needs to be an amnesty for those who committed crimes. Ordinarily, that's not the case, but I think in this case, it's more important that the truth come out so humanity can actually understand the totality of the moment that we're in, rather than X or Y go to prison for 5 or 10 years if that's going to keep disclosure from happening for the next 50.
Yeah.
Right. So that would be, I think, the way. Certainly, I think that represents Danny's point of view and the view of the New Paradigm Institute. We need protection of the whistleblowers. We need a truth and reconciliation process. And we need to make it as easy as possible for the governments to disclose the information that they've been hiding in a criminal way.
Let's bring it back then to the Global Disclosure Day, because you mentioned, it seems like a lifetime ago, those speakers, and I'm going to mention them some more because it's quite a lineup. As you say, you've got Ross Coulthart, Lou Elizondo, Carl Nell, Birdie Javrovsky, who is the founder of Albuquerque, New Mexico UFOs, Danny Sheehan, of course, Dr. Beatrice Villarreal, Rich Hoffman, Julia Mossbridge, Steve Bassett, Chrissy Newton, and a whole load more, Lester Nari, Nick Gold, and others that have been on the show, others who haven't yet, and some who I hope will come on soon to discuss their work in the topic. 2 hours is a hell of a short period with so many names. So what is the actual plan and format you're looking to run here? And what is the end goal achievement?
Well, some things like this interview were an inch wide and a mile deep. You have one person speaking for, 45 minutes, an hour, however long. With the Global Disclosure Day, what we wanted was to show the scope globally of people that are interested in disclosure. So we decided to go a mile wide and an inch deep. So there's going to be Lou and the main speakers will take, 5 minutes each, basically around the theme of zero doubt. Then we're going to go to live locations in Toronto and Denver and Albuquerque, where, hundreds of people are gathered to watch the Global Disclosure Day, then we're going to have a very special surprise announcement that is about a major strategic partnership that New Paradigm Institute has negotiated with one of the largest UAP organizations in the world, actually. And it's going to be very, very exciting. And to give your listeners just a little preview, you'll get the details on the show, but we'll be announcing that MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, and New Paradigm Institute are beginning active explorations toward a strategic partnership, strategic alignment. Just imagine, I mean, MUFON is for the last 60 years has been investigating all kinds of UFO sites and everything imaginable. They have a whole procedure and protocol and sending people out to measure the soil samples and so forth and so on. And our Citizens for Disclosure groups are the first citizen action groups in the history of the UFO movement. So what about bringing those together so that the citizen activists can go out with the MUFON people to the sites, and the MUFON people, the scientific rigor that they've been employing, can join the citizen activism all around disclosure? So Ron James is going to be there. He's the director of media and on the board of MUFON. He and I have been in conversation negotiating this, so he'll be on the Disclosure Day. Then we're going to go to different partners, Lester Nair, UAP Caucus, Nick Gold, Declassify UAP, all kinds of ICER, the International Coalition for Extraterrestrial Research, the Scientific Coalition for UFO Studies, all the big groups and some of the small groups that have just got the Hollywood Disclosure Alliance, Paradigm Research Institute, out in Hong Kong, the Orbs Research Institute, and there in Ireland, the UAP group there, Chris Gaffney is going to be on from Sweden. So there's all kinds of we wanted it to be a celebration. So the Citizens for Disclosure groups around the world, the partners, the luminaries could all speak not for long, but in solidarity with each other. That this is a global movement, ladies and gentlemen. This isn't about the U.S. and what the U.S. Congress is doing. We're not alone, period. That's a fact. And the people of the world are waking up. So we want to do this, Andy, as an annual event in the spirit of Earth Day. So next October 20th, we're going to hopefully have even a bigger event, bringing people together from all over the world to really celebrate humanity's cosmic moment. And so it's a very exciting moment for New Paradigm Institute. That there's a lot going on. It's going to be fun, very diverse. It's going to be, kind of crazy. It's all going to be on Zoom. It's going to be a wonderful. As of today, we're up to 2,413 watch parties that are happening all over the world. So I hope that everybody listening to this will go on to. In fact, I could send you the link so that people can just tune in. Just think Woodstock. Just get yourself a cup of coffee or a sandwich, or bring in your family, put your feet up, and just enjoy the show.
I'll have the link in the description, certainly, Jim. And do you know what? It is genuinely nice to hear that organizations working together, because, like you say, especially since 2017 and in the last couple of years, since COVID, when people had a lot more spare time for a while anyway, podcasts sprung up, blogs sprung up, more UFO groups sprung up, and as people went back to normality, some of those kind of died off and died away. Unfortunately, mine's kept going, but here we are. a lot of people work in silo, and even
Yes,
some of these bigger UFO, UAP groups and organizations
totally.
can stay so separate that it can not necessarily be detrimental to the UFO subject, but people can get so precious about their work, their narrative, their group. And if you don't support them in their group, you're against the subject or you're wrong and you don't belong. So it is nice to hear organizations, like you say, MUFON, which is maybe a little more old school in some people's minds. It can bring groups like that back to the forefront into kind of modern day, along with Citizens for Disclosure, New Paradigm Institute, and get working together,
Exactly.
because it shows that you're all working towards this one common thing, which is,
Exactly.
disclosure, UFOs. And there are people who listen to this for information, for entertainment, for infotainment, for whatever it may be. People will listen to this for the first time today, dipping their toe in the UFO subject. And hello to you if you have. Some of them will stick around, some of them won't, Jim, because they'll go, nah, UFO is still not for me. Some of them will get involved and become future researchers, authors, and everything else. You never know. So it's nice to hear that collective working together, because there's a lot of separate
Absolutely.
groups and entities.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, and that, and that is really a seminal point that you're making for the future. There's now so much going on in so many countries at so many levels. The European crash retrieval project that Beatrice Villarreal is the astronomer is heading up. The research on orbs in Hong Kong. The fact that in Brazil they have now convinced the Brazilian government is the first government in the world to acknowledge and designate ufology as a legitimate professional field. Right? I mean, all kinds of things that are happening. And we want to bring all those people together in a coalition, not with a single center, but a coalition in which everywhere is the center, and we're just actively collaborating, sharing information, and organizing around various projects that are in the strategic interest of the various organizations that are participating. So we're very excited about Global Disclosure Day. I think it's going to be a wonderful experience for all who join.
I'm going to get to some more chat around that through listener questions, Jim. But before we do that, I want to take you back then to 1992. And this is a two-part question. So you talked about your sighting. You talked about those orbs that you saw, spherical objects in the sky. What did you think at the time, part one of the question, you were looking at? Now, you say UFO, but to 1992, Jim Garrison, what was a UFO? What were you looking at?
Well, I knew about UFOs from my just general awareness and belief that it was a real phenomenon. At the time, I couldn't understand why three dots would be in the sky together. That was strange. And then as they moved back and forth, normally when an airplane turns around, there's a wide arc. So you can see it turning around in the sky. That's not what was happening. They were going like this, and then they were going like this, and like this, and like this. When I went, wait a minute, and then my assistant was there, Amy Vosbrink, and I said, Amy, do you see this? She looked at it. She says, yeah, that's really weird. And then we stopped the whole group. So there was probably a 7, 8 of us all together watching it for the minute. And then we all concluded this was a UFO. But again, because there was no context for it, it was quickly forgotten. That's the thing. Now you see it, there's a context for it. There's a community that affirms it, and it becomes important. Whereas back in 1992, it was sort of a source of embarrassment, even though we all were watching it together.
So then, Jim, part two to that question is, decades later, decades of discussion and relationship with Danny Sheehan later as well, and all the conversations you've had with others involved in the UFO topic. What do you think you were looking at that day?
I think we were seeing some intelligent vehicles in the sky, either from another dimension or from a far off star system, who knows? But it was clear to me that this was intelligent, and I think they were UFOs. They were craft appearing over Georgia, and as you may know, Russia and that part of the world has had many UAP sightings, many over decades. I remember being in Moscow one day, and it was 1991, in the spring of 1991. And a good friend of mine, Tankred Golan-Polsky, came in. He had been out in the Urals at his dacha over the weekend, and he was just wild-eyed. He said, "Jim, we all saw a craft. We could see the craft. It wasn't an orb. It was a craft. And hundreds of us came out, and we're all looking up at this round craft in the sky." He said it was the most amazing thing. He said then the military came, and it was a big deal. So once you have a UFO experience, particularly when you see a craft, at short distance, it changes your life, because you're being encountered by something off planet. And that blows your mind, literally, and expands the categories of cognition. It's ultimately a spiritual experience. It's what it is. And that's what a new paradigm induces in a person, is a spiritual awakening. So I would say that experience for me, at a smaller level, like my friend Tankred, at a larger level, because it was more immediate and clearly focused, and it was hundreds and hundreds of people all at the same time, including the military, just standing there in awe at this spacecraft that was hovering right above them.
What's the best evidence outside of your own personal sighting, which is obviously the best evidence for anyone, I think? What's the best evidence for this, the origin of this phenomenon being ET or interdimensional, whatever you want to call it, that you have heard or seen in your years of kind of research?
You mean a sighting like Roswell, or?
No, just, I mean, you're having conversations with Danny Sheehan and people like that. What's the best that you've heard that these are ET because there was this particular case with this evidence, or is it the collective documented evidence over the years?
Well, we just had a teach-in at Yale University. It's the first teach-in in history on UFOs. It was really incredible. There we were in one of the great halls of Yale, and people came, and one of the presenters was this physicist named Kevin Knuth at the University of Albany in New York. And he says, he was the first speaker. He says, "Ladies and gentlemen, let me just tell you as a physicist about this phenomena. We humans can go at maybe Mach 3 or Mach 4, 3 or 4 times the speed of sound. These things can go Mach 300. And as I observed over the Republic of Georgia, stop and turn around on a dime." He said, if humans did this, we would explode. And then they can be transmedium. They can go from 80,000 feet to sea level in 0.178 of a second. That's not possible by modern physics. They can go transmedium. Our fastest submarines can go maybe 30, 40 miles an hour. These guys are going 300 to 400 miles an hour. And they can come out. They don't have exhaust. They don't have any of the external manifestations of a craft going through the air. Well, how does this happen? He said. And then he shows the TikTok videos. that are fighter pilots in the U.S. The best fighter pilots in the world are tracking these TikTok. They're shaped like a tube. They don't have wings. They don't have a cockpit. They don't have windows, and they move with the F-16s. Then they disappear and they come back in, and it's all being tracked on radar. I mean, if anyone needs proof, look at the videos. Read Lou Elizondo's book, Imminent. He just kind of lays it out. I mean, these are the facts and nothing but the facts, ma'am. And what makes them UFOs is that what they're doing is not possible under modern technology. It's just not possible, but it's being incontrovertibly observed as true. So even though you haven't had your own UFO experience, go on Kevin Knuth's website and get his PDF of his PowerPoint, where he just lays out the information. It's really quite extraordinary. It's quite extraordinary. The physics that we're being confronted with that are clearly being driven and choreographed by an intelligence. So if it doesn't come from the Earth, where does it come from? Really only two options, or three. They could be from another star system, which many of the ETs say they come from. It can be from other dimensions, parallel universes, which we know is possible, or as these ultra terrestrials, future humans. Because if you look at Lou Elizondo's book Imminent and any of his presentations, he talks about the reality that what they appear to be able to do is bend space-time. So that while we, like, for example, if we want to get to the moon, we have to get a bunch of explosives in a rocket, light the fuse, push our way through gravity, because we don't know enough about gravity to do what they do. Apparently, they use gravity as a propulsion system.
Mm.
And if you can bend space-time back to E equals mc squared, right? If you can bend space-time, you can go faster than the speed of light. If you can bend space-time, that means you can go into the future and the past at will. That's all understood theoretically by physics today, but they can actually do it. And that's why they're so feverishly trying to engage in this reverse engineering, because they're trying to figure out what are the anti-gravitic principles here, that if we could figure it out, we could get to Jupiter, in a couple hours and have lunch and then come back. Right? They know that the impetus of the UAP is that humanity now knows that what was science fiction 30, 40 years ago is now a fact. And now humans just have to figure out how it happens. That's a whole different reality than thinking it's not true and impossible. We know the impossible is possible. And that's why the Legacy Group has been keeping it silent and secret and covered up for 80 years, because they're trying to figure out how to reverse engineer this stuff to build weapons.
Earlier this year, Jim, I interviewed Kevin Knuth. So if anyone's interested in the physics of UAP, certainly go back and check that one out. Kevin was wonderful, really good guest.
He's incredible.
Like you say. And regarding the Yale teaching, I just had Stephen Brown on last week, philosophy professor. Stephen's been on a few times. He was a speaker at the event as well, and we talked about the Yale teaching. So definitely check those ones out, folks. And all the links to various presentations and the Yale teaching and the channels and whatnot are all available in those descriptions as well. But listen, Jim, let's get to some listener questions to kind of dip in and out a few different things and pick your brains. So Dave Smethurst, wonderful to hear from Dave. Love getting in touch with Dave. He asks, Jim has done a lot of grassroots campaigning over the years. Often this can look like a pointless effort from the outside. What does he hope the campaign and other things he is planning for the Paradigm Institute will achieve, and what will its tangible impact be in helping the disclosure movement progress?
Well, good question. Citizen activism in history, as Martin Luther King said, that citizen activism, and in particular, in his case, civil disobedience, he said, it doesn't solve the problem immediately. What it does is awaken people to there's even an issue. And once people are awoken to the reality that there's an issue, then they can solve the problem. So that's very important in terms of UAP disclosure. For 80 years, people didn't even know that this was an issue because they were told that it didn't exist. Now people know it's an issue. And just last night in the Senate debate, for the people running for the Senate in the state of Nevada, they had George Knapp on asking them their position on UAP disclosure. And they both came out for it. So that's an example of where citizen activism raises consciousness that then allows the people that can make the decisions to become aware and then to transact whatever it is. So before there was the civil rights legislation in the United States, there had to be decades of citizen activism to wake people up to the fact that there was even an issue. So the fact that we now have citizens for disclosure groups all over the world is bringing into the public domain. This podcast is citizen activism. All you that are listening are learning something, and you're talking about it. And that's what changes the zeitgeist. That's what changes the world, is when people's perception changes. And that's the purpose of citizens activism. And then eventually, the people in the government and so forth and so on, in this case, in our governments, who've known this is true all along, but have been keeping it secret for nefarious reasons, will disclose what they know, and humanity can then take the next step in its evolutionary development.
So Dave has a follow-up question, well, a couple actually. So Dave says he does a lot of neighbourhood regeneration and service improvement in deprived states or under, impoverished areas. It's often hard to see if you're making an impact using standard metrics, so we use proxy measures to assess progress, i.e. if what we are doing is working, what specifically would we expect to see happening in 6 months, 2 years, and 5 years? So what would Jim expect to see in 6 months, 2 years, and 5 years if what the new Paradigm Institute is doing was working?
I don't think a crystal ball applies to the UAP issue. I don't think we're dealing with something like, recycling your trash, which is more quantifiable. I think we're dealing in this case with a fundamental transposition of values. I think we're dealing with the most important event in the entire history of the human race. I think we're at the beginning of a momentous milestone in the human journey, where for the first time, human beings all over the world, all at the same time, and all for the same reason, are coming into an awareness that we are not alone. So that's why the crystal ball won't apply, in my view, because this awareness is going to impact every single aspect of human society in different ways, at different speeds, but with an inevitable and inexorable consequence that's going to change everything once it takes hold. Because once you've had a UFO experience, once you as a human being come into a reality that we are not alone, that cosmic entities are at play and they're here, your whole world changes. And my intuition is that it's going to happen much faster than anybody suspects. That's why I'm an optimist, Andy, that the reality of the ETs is coming down upon us in a particularly forceful way. In fact, I think that's why they're here. I believe that the ET showed up in the powerful way that they had right at the moment when the United States ignited the thermonuclear bomb. And if you look at almost all universally, the people that have experienced the ETs over the last 80 years, everywhere in the world, they basically have the same message. We came because we're concerned that you guys are about ready to use nuclear warheads and you're destroying the environment. Don't you know that you're in one of the most precious planetary systems, in the known universe? And when the atomic bombs went off on July 16th, 1945, and then on August 6th and August 9th, that activated the alarm bells, at least of this quadrant of the galaxy. And extraterrestrials came to planet Earth to find out what's going on. And they've been remarkably benign.
On that, Jim, I think there's a point, and I'm going to actually come back and hold you to an answer on an aspect of the question, because I think Dave's question's fair. Well, your answer is also fair, but there's something worth answering there. But you mentioned Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the use of those weapons where thousands and thousands of lives were ended. ETs did not intervene. Non-human intelligence, whatever they are, did not intervene. Since then, there have been thousands upon thousands of tests of nuclear weapons in the air, under the water, across various locations, and I'm sure many of which we've never even heard of or even know happened. Those weren't stopped either, and we're still damaging the planet. You're still killing marine life. You're still killing wildlife. You're still
Totally
polluting huge swaths of the planet with this happening. Chernobyl, Fukushima. Yep. So these events, as far as aspects of this story lead us to believe, could or should have been stopped by ETs, non-human intelligence with greater technology and awareness. They could have said then, no, enough's enough, or we're going to help, but they didn't. What is the tipping point where they actually step in then? Because it seems like we're always, and this is where I don't agree with the people who think nuclear war would never happen because the ETs would stop it. They haven't so far.
I agree.
So how far do they let it go?
Well, there appears, this is a very good discussion point. If they're so advanced, why haven't they stopped us doing what we're doing? Right? Apparently, from what, one gathers, there's a protocol that they're prohibited from treating life forms on different planetary systems. It's like in Star Trek, the prime directive. You can't interfere with the life forms on a planet, except very, very subtly. You can't do it like, Cortez, going into Mexico in 1521, where you actually kill everybody. They're fully capable of doing this, obviously, but for some reason, they're not doing it. There has to be a reason for that. I don't know what the reason is, but it may be that if things get dangerous enough, they may intervene in a way that will turn events and keep us off the precipice, take us from the precipice. But we're dealing with unknowns.
Yeah.
That's all I can. That's all I can really say, and that's one reason why I believe that they're benign. If they'd have wanted to take over, they would have done it decades ago. Clearly, I think what they're trying to induce by the gossamer nature of their presence is to let us know that advanced beings are here. And therefore, our notion of human supremacy, which is why we're destroying the planet and each other, needs to be morphed, transformed into sacred reciprocity with all sentient beings. And that's one reason why we are developing training programs through the New Paradigm Institute and Ubiquity University in how you communicate with extraterrestrials through remote viewing and mental telepathy. How do we learn the mother tongue? How do we learn how to communicate with other life forms? It's very important, because the more we know of who they are and how they communicate, the more I think human nature will be opened up to a new pathway to an expanded identity for humanity.
I think, with all due respect, there's a lot of humanity I would not want communicating with any non-human intelligence. There's a lot of humanity I don't want to communicate with myself, let alone with a non-human intelligence. But listen, bringing it back to Dave's question, so I appreciate you're completely right that we're dealing with unknown quantities. It's very difficult to measure. However, with the work, the New Paradigm Institute, like you say, is putting, for example, you mentioned the courses. So there is still a plan there for one aspect of longevity, of teaching, of education for this subject. So I don't think Dave's question is actually unanswerable in that respect, because there are elements of what the New Paradigm Institute is trying to do that you could say within 6 months, 2 years, and 5 years, we have at least short, medium, and long-term goals. So while it's a very broad question to answer, and I suppose we have to then answer it from the point of view then, Jim, that the ultimate goal is disclosure, or the ultimate goal is playing a part in disclosure and the education around it. I'm not saying New Paradigm is going to directly bring disclosure upon it, but it's going to help, potentially, like all these other groups are trying to. So back to the question then, how would you measure success from the New Paradigm Institute, looking at a short term, a medium term, and a long term?
Well, the long term, if in 5 years, just to quantify Dave's question,
Yeah.
in 5 years, if we had a truly dynamic global coalition of thousands, possibly millions of people and organizations working at all levels of human society for disclosure and for a positive, open-hearted relationship with the non-human intelligences that we're experiencing, that would be a total success. That's what we're after. And for example, if in 5 years the Global Disclosure Day is embraced by all the world religions, people all over the world, come out on that day and celebrate humanity's cosmic moment, that would be a huge success. One of the prime goals that we would like within 3 years is to motivate the world religions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism, the indigenous traditions, to begin to actively take on their responsibility to enable, to catalyze humanity's cosmic moment. Now, that would be a success. So I think this is a good question, but the meta goal in 5 years is to have built a global coalition and global movement of citizen activists, institutions, corporations, and governments working for disclosure. That's what our goal is.
I'll accept that answer, Jim. Thanks for that. I appreciate me going back to it as well. So
And
thank you, Dave. Question from Don. Don says, this looks like a fantastic presentation of what we know about UFO or UAPs with a diverse list of presenters. My question is the event being promoted and advertised to the general public and not just via outlets that those of us interested in the topic will see? I think it's a crucial point in this time to expose more and more people to this information.
Absolutely. You dream big, start small, scale organically, right? This is not being advertised and promoted on CNN or BBC. It's being promoted on this podcast. It's being promoted to the 2.4 million members on Reddit that are interested in the UFOs. It's being promoted actively through all social media channels of our partners and the New Paradigm Institute. That's why we've got over 2,400. Our goal was to get 2,500 watch parties, and it looks like we're going to make our goal. Next year, we'll expand beyond that. And I would say, going back to Dave's question, in 5 years, Global Disclosure Day will be talked about by the BBC. Let us hope and pray. Maybe earlier.
Do you know, Jim, you're going to regret saying 5 years so many times. And I know you've not meant it in that sense, but this...
I was just referring to Dave's question.
Yeah, absolutely. But, a few years ago, Lou Elizondo made a comment off the cuff that, come back in 5 years' time and see where we are. And to this day, people run with that to mean...
And it was like 18 months later, right?
He was hinting at,
That's why I've been saying, Andy, I think all this is going to happen more quickly than we expect. That's my personal view. Just
to expand on that, another question from the Hive was very similar, but they asked, have you considered getting celebrities and influencers involved to help engage the public?
Oh, yeah. We're in touch with a number of celebrities. There's a celebrity up in Canada, Chrissy Newton, big influencer, and she's coming on the program. And we've got a contact with scores of influencers out there, and we've sent them all the information about Global Disclosure Day, invited them to participate in one way or another, and it's really exciting.
I know Chrissy, and Chrissy's great. She's very UFO centric, though. She's involved in the topic, so I think from that point of view, they're looking at people maybe from outside the UFO sphere. But I think that's probably a difficulty, isn't it, to reach out to folks who maybe don't have an open interest already in the UFO topic to say...
Well, we have a Hollywood movie star that we're have agreement in principle to join, but I don't want to mention their name because if they don't show up, people will be disappointed. But this question is, in some ways, the $64,000 question, like Dave's. Where do you want to be when, and how can you expand the coterie of people that are supporting what you're doing out into the mainstream?
And I think it's very similar to, there's a lot of documentaries hitting the screens over the next couple of months. So, and I'm
totally.
We've got James Fox's The Program, which doesn't have a release date yet, folks. So no matter what you see online, until James Fox himself tells you when it is and where it's going to be, there is no date for it, but it should be hopefully soon. The trailer's available online. There is a series, a documentary from George Knapp coming out on Netflix. There is a new series on MGM Plus, which begins on October 27th, which I just put the trailer online for yesterday. I think I shared it. I've seen the first couple of episodes of that as well, which is really good. And obviously there's the Dan Farah produced documentary that Lou Elizondo confirmed it and whatnot as well. And going back to, I think, what a lot of, more specifically, I'm thinking of Beyond on MGM Plus. It's a wonderful production, and I'm guessing the Netflix stuff and I'm guessing the Dan Farah productions will be similar. And this is just a guess. A lot of folks in the UFO community, Jim, are not some folks. I can't say a lot. I can't put a number on it. They get frustrated when they see no matter how high quality these productions, it's the same old stuff. But I think the point is, if you're engrossed or entrenched in the UFO community and you're involved in any kind of UFO research, whether that's you're on social media, you read books, you listen to podcasts, whatever it may be, you're going to know a lot more than 99% of the public. However, these documentaries going out on big streaming platforms are likely to hit a lot of the public who don't know this information. They don't know about 2017. They don't know about the New York Times. They don't know about the Tic Tac, the Gimbal. They don't know about Luis Elizondo, Chris Mellon. These are all new names, new stories, new ideas, but they're being presented to a new audience that you
Yeah.
have to expose to then bring in for things like Global Disclosure Day to grow, for then celebrities to come into
Exactly.
events like this and grow. So while I appreciate people's frustration at, listen, let me just put it this way. MGM Plus or Netflix being the biggest one, Netflix are not going to produce a UFO documentary that's going to wow the UFO community with lots of new information we have never heard before, because it would be too niche and it would not hit the right audience. It's going to be far more generalized, and then you're going to need folks like James Fox to take that niche and create something that, one, the general public can watch, but also the UFO community can watch and go, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So I think there are levels to the exposure you can give to a
Exactly.
public. Is that fair?
Totally fair. Totally fair. The other side of that is that the let's take Lou Elizondo. He was on the Daily Show, the Jon Stewart Comedy Hour. He was on CBS, I think, Good Morning. He was on
Joe Rogan. He done his Rogan appearance finally.
Joe Rogan, Danny Jones. So 5 years ago, the Daily Show would have never done this.
Yeah.
Now it's starting to seep into the mainstream media. That's what's exciting. Slowly, it's getting in there. And so just as you were saying, MGM, Netflix, James Fox, Farah, all these guys, it's one thing after another. One thing after another.
My big hope, Jim, is people go and see things like Beyond on MGM Plus. They watch the Netflix documentaries, and it gets new eyes and ears on the UFO topic. And those people go, here's a new one from this guy, James Fox, who's now talking about not just the UFO topic. He's talking specifically about crash retrieval programs in the UFO topic. And then those new eyes, we're all going to watch the program. Most people listening to this are going to watch the program. But you want new folks coming in and going, actually, what?
Totally.
I want to learn more. I want to know more. And that's where they're going to get real information and new information as well.
Of course. That's like the Daily Show, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that goes right into the mainstream. CBS News goes right into the mainstream.
Yeah.
And Netflix in its own way. Netflix has got, I think, 200 or 250 million viewers. That is not insignificant. Joe Rogan goes out to gazillions of people. And he's been very actively engaged. And so I would say by this time next year, there'd be a growing crescendo. Hollywood, we know the Hollywood scene fairly well, particularly Danny. And we have a partnership with Elijah Woods, Spectrovision, the guy that played Frodo in Lord of the Rings. And Danny was just down there doing a 7-module podcast with Spectrovision. And all kinds of the movie houses down there are doing, almost all of them are doing some ET related project because they can feel that that's in the ether now. That's what the public wants. And so it's a very exciting time. Very exciting time.
And you know what, Jim? I think to wrap up, some of those programs you mentioned, The Daily Show, CBS, whatever it may be. Folks have watched or listened to those, and a couple of them have seeped through to find a podcast like this. So thank you and welcome if you've came along. And hopefully those folks tune in to Global Disclosure Day, Jim, on October 20th, 1 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Central European time. I believe that's 6 p.m. UK time on the day as well, for a 2-hour live stream, which isn't a whole lot of time either. So they're not even asking at the New Paradigm Institute you give up your entire day to spend watching YouTube. It's a couple of hours that will fly by. It's going to be fast paced, and I think that's a great thing, especially for a sometimes younger audience, which is used to content being short and snappy, bang, 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 and it moves on. So, Jim, do you want to give any kind of last call to action to get folks watching before we wrap up?
This is a great time to be alive, folks. And this podcast, Andy, is on the cutting edge of what you need to know to animate your excitement and sense of possibility in a world that is being dragged down by conflict and environmental despoilation and lots of stresses in our world. What we're doing through the UAP disclosure movement is of historic import. And so by watching this podcast and getting involved in the movement, you're helping to shape the human future. So thanks for all you do, my friend.
That is all for this episode. Thank you very much for tuning in. Don't forget to leave the podcast a review on your chosen platform. Apple and Spotify do make a huge difference to the algorithm. If you're checking the show out on YouTube, please don't forget to like and leave a comment on here as well. Any sharing you do is very much appreciated on any social media platform. And finally, you can listen to shows ad-free and sponsor-free in their glorious full versions by subscribing for less than the price of a coffee on Apple, Spotify. Just search That UFO Podcast Premium. YouTube, you can sign up and be a member, or you can do that through patreon.com. Thank you very much for listening, folks.
It wasn't a tic-tac and not quite a saucer, more like a hubcap designed by Chaucer, a little baroque and quite steampunk, like Alice was playing bass for the Parliament of Folk. The little fucker hovered right outside of my window, and when I shoved out the screen, he made it an issue. I don't think he expected me to see his ass, but I'd had some champagne and smoked a little.